Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you find this. Well, tomorrow is a big day. Many people have been waiting for. Lots of people voted early, and the rest will do their civic duty on tomorrow to see who's going to be the next president of the United States. Now, as we continue to get older, these election cycles get dirtier and dirtier each time it comes around. All we do is listen to the candidate we want to vote for and listen to what they say. But when was the last time you heard your candidate talk about the Constitution? Now, the sad thing is, most people in society have no concept of where the person stands that they punched a ballot for. All they know is sound bites and talking points, and they make their decisions based on that. Well, black people don't even need to hear anything, because if the person is a Democrat, that's all we need to know. As I have stated before, all we keep hearing is Trump is racist. Trump is racist. Trump is racist. Trump is racist. I mean, our hate is so strong that we overlook anything a Democrat has said or done. The only thing we know Joe Biden has done is he was Barack Obama's vice president, and he authored the 1994 crime bill. Well, let me give you a little bit of Joe Biden racist history. As I stated before, 90% of blacks don't care because he's a Democrat. And in our eyes, Democrats wear halos and Republicans wear horns. For many blacks, even if Jesus Christ himself told them this information, they would ignore it. So what has Biden done to help our communities since he's been in the Senate? As I heard at the beginning of a song years ago, what we're going to do right here is go back, way back into time. And not only are we going to go back in time, we're going to give you some current things as well. Now, what I'm going to share with you will not be in chronological order, but it's still going to make plenty of sense for those who want to learn. But for those who've already made their minds up that Joe Biden is God, you might as well stop listening right now, because I'm not here to entertain you. I'm not here to make you feel good about your pick. I'm not here to make people feel good about their Trump pick. But we have black people all the time want to talk about whatever the Republicans done for black folks, but they refuse to ask the same question of their Democrats. All these years and nothing to show for it. So before I get started, I saw something on Joe Biden's Twitter page. And the post said, "We are everything that Donald Trump is not." So I have to agree with him. So let's find out who he really is. Now, one of the things that really got blacks in an uproar in January of 2007 is when he said, you got the first African American who was articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. That's a storybook, man. Translation, for those of y'all who don't understand what that means, is the rest of us don't exude those characteristics. And Donna Brazile had something to say after that, and she said, when I heard his comments, I thought he was referring to a bygone era. Years ago, when white folks referred to black people with education, they often used words like articulate to suggest they were different, they were acceptable. Now, I don't know if y'all remember some years ago when George Bush was in office, they were throwing Colin Powell's name out there, and they were saying he's such a articulate guy. I mean, they throw that out there about black folks like it's a compliment, like we can't be civilized people. But, I'm not here to talk about Colin Powell. We're here to talk about you black folks' good buddy, Joe Biden. But Donna Brazile said that they were okay as compared to the rest of African Americans. So I think it came across that Joe Biden was referring to Senator Obama as if he was a candidate running in the 1960s, not in the 21st century. And not going to even get into it, but guess who Donna Brazile is going to vote for or has already voted for. Now, Jesse Jackson had this to say, said these are loaded words. And that's why he should interpret what he meant by those loaded words. It was an attempt, I thought, to diminish Barack's attributes and dismissive of our previous campaigns that made Barack's candidacy possible. Now, go back and look at something else Jesse Jackson said about what he wanted to do to Barack Obama. And I'm not going to even tell you that. If you want to find it out, go look up what he said about Barack Obama. Now, Obama's office issued a written statement as well on the subject, where his statement said, I didn't take Senator Biden's comments personally, but obviously they were historically inaccurate. African American presidential candidates like Jesse Jackson, Shirley Chisholm, Carol Moseley Braun, and Al Sharpton gave a voice to many important issues through their campaigns, and no one would call them inarticulate. Now, after Obama's office released that statement, old Joe, he followed with his own written statement. And he said, I deeply regret any offense my remarks in the New York Observer might have caused anyone. That was not my intent, and I expressed that to Senator Obama. But in an earlier conference call with reporters about his presidential campaign, Biden actually acknowledged that he was quoted accurately in the New York Observer, but he insists his comments are being misunderstood. Now, how can the comments be misunderstood when he's trying to save face, but then at the same time defend what he's saying and said, I meant what I said, and I said what I meant, because that's what he's telling you. And so when asked why, if he feels so strongly about Obama, was he running against him for the Democratic nomination? His response was, I think he's great. I think they're all great. I think I'm better. I think I'm more prepared. Did you catch that? He said he thinks he's better. And based on a lot of the stuff he said over the years with regards to whites and non-whites, Joe Biden is not talking about politics. He thinks he is better. At a Rotary Club meeting in South Carolina, he actually joked about the state's Confederate history, saying that his home state of Delaware was a slave state that fought beside the North. And he said that's only because we couldn't figure out how to get to the South. There were a couple of other states in the way. And I actually touch on that a little bit in my book, but hey, what do I know? At Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or through me directly at myronjones@gmail. But he said in Delaware, the largest growth in population is Indian Americans moving from India. You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking. Now, after this, Biden apologist said this statement was taken out of context. Amazingly, everything he says is taken out of context according to his supporters. Amazing how that works. But everything Trump says is never taken out of context because he meant exactly what he said. Now, when Obama was running again for the second term against Mitt Romney, I mean, I watched him make this statement live somewhere. I don't know where I saw it because I normally try to stay away from news channels and all of that stuff, debate. I don't put all that negative garbage in my mind on a regular basis. Some people put all that stuff in their minds on a daily basis. And then they wonder why their mentality is the way it is. I have to wake up in the morning reading. I listen to videos throughout the day that are uplifting. Throughout the day, at some point, I'm reading. And late at night, I'm reading. Because we have so much negative that's vying for our attention, and negative normally wins. But during that process, when Obama was running for that second term, he said, when he was talking about Republicans, he said, they're going to put y'all back in chains. Now, that's pretty ironic because the only people who ever had black people in chains in this country were Democrats. But get this one. He said he enjoyed black kids sitting on his lap. And he learned about roaches from being around black kids. I mean, man, look at here. And I mean, with today's technology, you can say something like that might have been manipulated, and it's highly possible. But I'm gonna go with it and say, because when I was listening to him speak, when he said it, sounded like he was just mumbling and searching for words. But why did he have to, even if the tape was edited or manipulated, he still said, I learned about roaches from black kids. Now, October 2nd, 1975, he said he opposed busing. And he was actually doing a television interview that's actually in a congressional record. And on busing, he said it's an asinine concept, the utility of which has never been proven to me. And he said his record on school desegregation has been misinterpreted, and he maintains he supported busing as a remedy for intentionally discriminatory policies that kept white and black students in separate schools in the South. I'm going to touch on that in a little bit. And just a little bit over a year ago, August 8, 2019, he was speaking at an education, and he was speaking on education and the need to challenge students at a town hall event. And this event was actually hosted by the Asian and Latino Coalition in Des Moines, Iowa. And running off at the mouth again, what he said, we should challenge students in these schools. We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. So you have no poor white kids? I'm just asking a question. May 23rd, 2020, earlier this year. That's when he was on Charlemagne's radio show. And Charlemagne was pressing it. And he told Charlemagne, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, you ain't black. So if you don't go vote for him, you ain't black. And 50 Cent that came out the other day and expressed his reason for not supporting Biden and supporting Trump. And, he said he wasn't a fan of Trump, but he's also not a fan of higher taxes, which Biden has proposed. But I just read something yesterday that he's recanted his decision to support Trump, and he's going to support Biden. So I guess when Chelsea Handler came out the other day and told him, I had to remind him he was black, I guess when Chelsea told him that, he had to come on back to the plantation. But since Biden's been in the Senate, he had voted for most of the anti-busing amendments that came before him. And around that time, after a few years in the Senate, he actually broke ranks with the Northern liberals. And he actually joined his racist colleague, Jesse Helms. I think Jesse Helms has a book When Hell Was in Session. And I bought it and read it too. I mean, I'll read anything, because I believe we can learn from anybody if we know how to learn. But Jesse Helms wanted to stop all federal efforts to integrate schools anywhere in the country. And he wanted to get rid of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And then Biden voted to stop the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare from requiring schools to provide information on the racial makeup of their student bodies, making it impossible for the government to withhold federal funds from school districts that refuse to integrate. And Senator Helms' proposal was eventually rejected, but later on, Joe Biden actually proposed his own amendment to that bill, to the education bill, stipulating that none of the federal funds could be used by school systems to assign teachers or students to schools for reason of race. And in that bill that he proposed, he was trying to take out Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. Now, the NAACP called Biden's proposal an anti-black amendment. And there was only one black person in the Senate at the time. That was Senator Edward Brooke. And he called it the greatest symbolic defeat for civil rights since 1964, and said that Biden's amendment would eliminate virtually every remedy for segregation, as school systems will be prohibited from assigning students on the basis of race, no matter what the method. And he accused Biden of leading an assault on integration. And a guy named Tom Atkins, who was the NAACP over in Boston, said in March of that year, an anti-busing amendment is an anti-desegregation amendment, and an anti-desegregation amendment is an anti-black amendment. And U.S. News and World Report said in October of '75, where they published a feature article on busing, and they actually interviewed what they would call, a representative from each side of the issue. And Edward Brooke was brought in for the pro-busing side, and Joe Biden was brought in for the anti-busing side. And Biden was asked whether busing caused more harm than good, and he said absolutely. And he said he had examined the arguments used to justify busing, and they just seemed to him to be profoundly racist. He claimed that busing reinforced the ideas of black inferiority, and it implied that African Americans could cut it educationally only if they sat next to white students. It implies that blacks have no reason to be proud of their inheritance and their own culture. Now, the only problem with him making a statement such as that is that black schools received less funding when they were segregated. And probably right today they're still receiving less funding. Well, we can be honest about it. That system really ain't changed. Yeah, you have integrated schools, and a lot of the schools out in the other areas, they want the top students regardless of where they're from. So they'll run into the black communities and seek out to take all of the black top educational students, and then the black schools lose again. But the funding for the black schools is not on the same par with funding for the white schools. We know it. Black schools get the worst textbooks. And I remember when I was in high school, my 12th grade year, I was taking calculus. And our calculus books were old. They were still in pretty good shape because our calculus teacher was a type of teacher that didn't believe in you not taking care of things. And then he was a track and football coach, assistant track and football coach, and the head track coach was actually in charge of the book department. So you put that together. And so I remember seeing some students from other schools one day, and they had their calculus textbooks. Amazingly, they didn't look like mine. And then the other thing that Joe Biden misses is that the black schools get the leftover teachers that no one else wanted. Now, in a 1975 interview, Biden said this: the new integration plans being offered are really just quota systems to assure a certain number of blacks, Chicanos, or whatever in each school. I mean, that's amazing how he linked blacks, Chicanos with the word whatever. Now, that to me is the most racist concept you can come up with, said Biden. What it says is, in order for your child with curly black hair, who's he talking about, brown eyes, who he talking about, and dark skin, to be able to learn anything, he needs to sit next to my blonde-haired, blue-eyed son. That's racist. And later that same year, he would say the same thing in a different way. He said, I think the concept of busing, that we're going to integrate people so that they all have the same access, so that they have all the access, same access, and they learn to grow up with one another and all the rest, is a rejection of the movement of black pride, a rejection of the entire black awareness concept where black is beautiful. Black culture should be studied, and the cultural awareness of the importance of their own identity, their own individuality. So I guess he knew what black pride was, huh? That's amazing. He know what black pride is, and he's white. He says segregation for black people is a good thing. Amazing. Now, when we hear the 1994 crime bill, most of what it's focused on is the high incarceration rate for blacks. What about these other items that are seldom mentioned? It actually expanded the death penalty. It created 60 new death penalty offenses under 41 federal capital statutes. It eliminated education funding for incarcerated students. So it basically gutted the prison education program. And, despite of wealth of research showing education increases post-release employment, reduces recidivism, and improves outcome for the formerly incarcerated and their families, it actually hasn't been reversed. And something that kind of flew under the radar was the First Step Act that was signed by Donald Trump in December of 2018. It was called something else originally, but they finally decided on the name First Step Act. And under that plan, I thought the number was 3,000, but I found out that the number is actually 7,000 inmates had been released from prison under this program. And 98% of those released inmates were black, who had actually been sentenced to these sentences based on the 1994 crime bill. Now, ironically, in 1981, he actually criticized Republicans for pushing longer sentences for nonviolent offenders when prisons were already overcrowded. But in 2015, he said he was proud of his 1994 crime bill. And I've been searching and searching and searching, and I still haven't found a Republican crime bill. I mean, if you know about it, please leave that in the comment section, because I'd like to read it. And I'm not being funny, I'm being serious. If you know of a Republican crime bill written and sponsored by any Republican in our lifetime, please put that in the comment section. Now, during the 80s, 1980s, Joe Biden helped pass laws reinstating the federal death penalty, like I mentioned. He abolished federal parole and increased the penalties for marijuana possession. Now, I just thought about something about marijuana possession. I posted a picture a few days ago on social media of a guy cradling his son, and it said Joe Biden being sympathetic with his son for cocaine use. And below it, there was another picture, and it showed another guy who had an ounce of marijuana, and the caption said, "Straight to jail for you." Now, I kid you not, a guy actually asked on that picture, what had Biden done this century? And in all honesty, there's no need to have a dialogue with someone who makes a statement like that. If you don't have sense enough to see what problems were caused by Biden's hand in the 1975 anti-busing legislation, the 1984 drug/crime bill, the 1986 drug/crime bill, the 1988 drug/crime bill, and the 1994 crime bill, nothing I say will help you. Many blacks have told me he's changed. Well, he did get older. Have you listened to the other videos on this channel where I mentioned what he said about not being black? Blacks have no diversity with the exception of a few. Black women stock grocery sales. Those were made this century. As a matter of fact, those were made a few weeks and a few months ago. That's all 2020. So, what has he done in the 21st century? When he said that, said he was proud of his crime bill. I mean, how much more clear can you be? Now, did you hear me mention what he said in August of last year about the poor kids being just as talented as white kids? And as I stated, who said the white kids were the only talented kids? Who said poor kids were all non-white with your brown curly hair and your dog skin? So we're not worried about what he said and did 40 years ago, but we're worried about what Trump has said recently. All of these statements I just said are recent. 2015, when he said he was proud of the crime bill. 2019, when he said poor kids are just as talented as white kids. You ain't black if you don't vote for me. Black women stock shelves. Latinos are a much more diverse community than black folks. That's all recent. That's all 21st century, right? So, since all of these statements by Biden are recent, what are black folks even talking about what he said 40 years ago for? 1989, George Bush gave an address outlining his plans to ramp up the war on drugs. That's funny in itself. Y'all know about that. But what many don't know is that blacks felt that Bush was not hard enough. Check your Congressional Black Caucus when they were trying to meet with or met with George Bush, the elder, and Ronald Reagan. They felt like they were too soft on the war on drugs in the black community. And so when the crackdown came after the 1994 bill, then the Congressional Black Caucus members complained that Republicans did that. And Joe Biden delivered the Democratic response and blasted the Republicans' plan to drastically increase incarceration for drug crimes from the right. But it was actually him who did it. Biden said, quite frankly, the president's plan is not tough enough. It's not bold enough. This is when he's doing his bill. Or imaginative enough to meet the crisis at hand. In a nutshell, the president's plan does not include enough police officers to catch the violent thugs. And I remember when that crime bill passed, how the police presence on the Houston streets increased. And what they did, they didn't hire too many more cops. What they did is they took where two cops were riding together, they actually separated where one cop would be in each police vehicle. And so that put more vehicles on the street, but it didn't really increase the amount of cops. But it made it look that way because you had more vehicles patrolling. And so he said, you don't have enough police officers to catch the violent thugs. You don't have enough prosecutors to convict them. You don't have enough judges to sentence them. And you don't have enough prison cells to put them away for a long time. That's Joe Biden. And in 1993, he said this: there's a cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock. And when we hear the term born out of wedlock, when we look at the news, out of wedlock, when we read any article, out of wedlock, when we see welfare, what do we all think of? We always think of black kids, because the system has conditioned us that black people are the only ones living like that. I read something the other day, it said white families having more out of wedlock births than blacks and anybody else, but that news doesn't get reported. And I'm not being racist here, I'm just telling you the system is conditioning everybody in society to think a certain way, and society can't even figure it out. So without parents, when you think about kids growing up without parents, who you think of? You think of blacks. But in that same article I read, it said you got more, and this wasn't written by a black person. This was actually, no matter of fact, it wasn't even an article, it was actually a book I read here recently. And it said what you won't know, because you'll never see it on TV, you'll never see it in statistics or any of the things. He said you have more absentee white fathers than you do absentee black fathers. He said you got more black fathers taking care of their kids than white fathers. And this book was written by a white guy. I'm not going to tell you the name of the book because it's a pretty lengthy read, but it's very eye-opening. Without supervision, Joe Biden's still talking about blacks. Without any structure, what do they say about us? Without any conscience developing, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. Well, if you're taking away their parents and locking them up for non-violent offenses, you know, an ounce of weed here, and but you letting all these big players keep running because somebody caught with cocaine under that crime bill would have to have 100 times the amount in cocaine than to get the same sentence that a black person would be locked up for crack. So that's who put that in place. And I'm at the 33-minute mark, and I look at the analytics, and I see a lot of times I know how long, I know who's watching the videos all the way through, and I know a lot of people are not. And so the average length of video is 13 minutes. I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to educate you. And so Biden explained that he urged his colleagues to support aid to such youth now, or else they will become the predators 15 years from now. Well, if you're taking their parents away, you're not leaving them with anybody to provide any structure. What do you think is going to happen to them? They're going to be predators because they have nobody setting examples and leading the way in their homes. And as for the already existing predators, who's he talking about? Because white kids are talented, remember? They are beyond the pale, many of these people, beyond the pale. We have no choice but to take them out of society. What did the 1994 crime bill do? Because the 84, 86, and 88 legislation wasn't enough. So he came up with a new one that was very extensive to make sure he locked more black people up. And so we have no choice but to take them out of society. Rehabilitation, when it occurs, we don't understand it and we don't notice it. And even when we notice it and know it occurs, we don't know why. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. He don't want you to be rehabbed so you can assimilate yourself back in society and become a productive citizen. He took away everything that was going to be beneficial to help, though. And I mean, I personally believe a lot of people can change and improve their lives. I honestly believe that because I'm a sinner saved by grace. I don't believe all of them should be released back into society. And I sit here, and my wife and I will see things. She loves true crime shows on television, and we'll see where you have all of these white predators, these white rapists, these white child molesters, these white pedophiles. They'll get sentenced 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and then they'll get released after 2 or 3 years on good behavior back into society to go and perform their acts right again. Those are violent offenders. Those are true predators, and they're allowed back on the street. But you got all these black men locked up in prison, these black women locked up in prison, because Joe Biden said, along with your congressional black caucus, let's lock up these black folks for running this marijuana through the community, for running this cocaine through, well, not even cocaine, this crack through the black community. Let's lock them up. And they actually in prison 30, 40, 50 years for an ounce of marijuana. I read something not too long ago where a black man had been in prison for 30 plus years for stealing what was it? Can't remember what it was. Might have been a pack of cigarettes or something like that. It was something, and I'm not saying he should have been stealing. I'm not saying that at all. But come on, 30 plus years for a pack of cigarettes, and you got these predators being released on a regular basis for good behavior. I'm gonna be honest with you. Ain't no rehab for them. That's just my thought. But I'm getting worked up now about that because Joe Biden said you black folks don't need no rehab. Don't allow your black teenagers to get educated while they're in prison so they can get back and become a productive citizen in society. But these violent sex offenders get released back into society on a regular basis. Violent white murderers, first degree murderers, second degree murderers get released back into society after 10 years. But your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, your mothers, your fathers locked up for an ounce of marijuana. And you want to sit here and vote for the guy who put the legislation in place to do it, but you want to get mad at Donald Trump. Man, I mean, I said in the last video, my wife don't like using this word, but I'm supposed to use it. We stupid as hell. Now, when Biden was running for the Senate in 1972, he actually expressed support for integration and busing while he was running his campaign. But once he got elected, he reversed course in 73 and 74. And he started voting for all of those anti-busing bills that came through the Senate. Now, I was reading something one day, and they interviewed a lot of different people and asked where they're going to vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And I just pulled one comment about a black lady, and she said the reason she was voting for Biden is because it's the closest we can get to a third term for Obama without electing Michelle. Now, is that really something to look forward to? Because according to Tavis Smiley, Cornel West, Louis Farrakhan, and Elbridge Cleaver, home ownership declined under Obama. All positive economic markers got worse under Obama for blacks. Unemployment got worse for blacks. I mean, I said on another video where his administration told black people they would have to accept high black unemployment as the new normal. So it's getting close to a third Obama term, really good business for black folks. I mean, I know he's all cool and suave and debonair and all that, but after that, what we got? I'm just asking a question. So I didn't come out publicly and talk about that. And, you know, people get mad at Farrakhan, but you have to remember when Obama was running and came out, Farrakhan called him the Messiah. So we love Farrakhan when he said that, but when Farrakhan came behind and said, okay, brother, you ain't doing right since you've been in that office, now we want to get mad. Can't have it both ways. And so, based on that information, is that what we're looking forward to under Obama? I mean, I might as well call him Biden, but Biden, because I'm going to tell you, I honestly believe if Joe Biden's elected, and I don't know who's going to win, do what you want to do. But you can't go back and say black unemployment went up because of Donald Trump. Because black unemployment is the lowest it's ever been in decades. I mean, not to be funny, but I think our unemployment rate ain't been this low since slavery. So that's why these black men are voting for Trump, because doors open for them in the job world. And that's not something they saw under the Obama-Biden presidency. And so is our hate so strong for Donald Trump that we just want him out of office without a real plan from his challenger? Joe Biden has said the Equality Act is his top priority, hoping to sign what would be a landmark civil rights law within 100 days. Now, is that really civil rights? Now, when asked about support for gay marriage when he was vice president, he said, no, Barack nor I support redefining from a civil side what constitutes marriage. We do not support that. Now, when he was asked about reparations for blacks, he said his answer would depend on what it was and if it would include Native Americans as well. Now, isn't it amazing that he has a plan for people who have made a decision to do what they do, but he has to study to see if blacks should get any legislation, and it has to include Native Americans? And not all of them, but a lot of them have got, became pretty well off through those casinos. And so he has a plan for those who made a decision, but not for those of y'all who came over here in the transatlantic slave trade, descendants of that. Because he wants y'all to stay in your place. And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Now, what is his plan according to the Lift Every Voice legislation? And with that legislation, he proposes to invest $900 million in gun violence reform. I mean, it was some gun reform, gun control reform in that 1994 crime bill. He wants to spend $1 billion per year on juvenile justice reform. Well, I told you earlier, he didn't want to spend anything on juvenile education in the justice system. And he wants to address environmental justice. Well, people are the ones that's damaging the environment. It ain't us. It's all them people who are really destroying things. But they want to put it off on us like it's us doing it. Let me ask you a question. Whose legislation made it possible for our people to get arrested at will in the first place? Did you listen to the video I did a couple of weeks ago where the former sheriff said they were incentivized to receive federal funding under Joe Biden's 1994 crime bill if they went into the black communities more and arrested more black people, because he said that's where the legislation said the money would be, Joe Biden's crime bill. And so who made it possible for our people to get arrested in the first place? He said he was in favor of paying slavery reparations to African American and Native Americans if studies found direct cash payments to be a viable option. Did you hear me say the word if? That wasn't my word, that was his. Now, get this. He wants to study if he can put cash in the hands of black folks. But here's a piece of legislation I guarantee you that 90% of you who vote for don't know happened. Right before he and Barack Obama left office in 2016, he authored another piece of legislation to give descendants of the Holocaust some more reparations. Obama signed it, and he actually said that these people shouldn't have to live in the conditions they find themselves in. Did you hear what Obama said? No. Look up and see what Obama said about giving blacks reparations, and then look at what he said about the Holocaust descendants and their reparation. He said blacks don't need no reparation. Y'all got better schools, so y'all don't need no money. But the Holocaust descendants didn't have to live like that. Now, when Biden authored that bill, did he study to see if they needed to receive cash payments in hand? Or did he just write the legislation and they sent the money to them? You need to think about this stuff. Civil rights attorney Leo Terrell had this to say: I've been a civil rights attorney for 30 years, and I don't know of anything Joe Biden has done. That's a civil rights attorney, black guy. The other day, Kamala Harris was actually asked if she thought Donald Trump was a racist, and she immediately said yes. And an interviewer didn't press any further. I seem to remember her saying the same thing about her new buddy, Joe Biden. Now, as long as Trump has been saying, make America great again, black folks have been getting pissed off because they keep asking, when was America ever great? Cool. We'll go with that. I mean, we gonna go with that. When was America great? We'll go with that. But get this one. Joe Biden recalled working with Senator James Eastland years ago, back in the good old days. And when talking about working with Eastland, I even talk about James Eastland in my book, but hey, what do I know? Available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble or at myronjones@gmail.com. But Biden said when he was working with Eastland, at least there was some civility. Now, this is the same James Eastland who described blacks in Montgomery, Alabama as slimy, juicy, unbearably stinking niggers, African flesh eaters, and he actually called on whites to use guns, bows and arrows, slingshots, and knives in pursuit of dead niggers. Boy, look, I'm going to say it again. We stupid as hell. Biden went so far to say that the Democratic Party could use a liberal George Wallace. You do know who George Wallace is, don't you? Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. That kind of sound like in the movie The Temptations when David Ruffin told Otis, you said I could be a temptation forever. He also praised a guy named John Stennis for his exceptional character on the Senate floor. Now, who is John Stennis? Well, he opposed the Voting Rights Act. He opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1968. And he also signed the Southern Manifesto. Look up the Southern Manifesto when you get a second. I mean, that's for those of y'all who want to know. And according to this American system, John Stennis must have been a man of great character, like Biden described him, because there are many monuments named after him around the country. And the most notable one is the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. You know, the amazing thing to me, but not surprising, is how we as blacks treat folks. Biden's past record is not relevant because based on what I was told, people can change. You know, and that was from a defender of Democrats and a Biden supporter. And like I said, I believe people can change, but I don't think Joe Biden changed. Bill Clinton's record of indiscretion is not relevant because we supported it. Hillary Clinton's record is irrelevant because we supported her. LBJ and his racist past, not relevant. I mean, LBJ had to be a prophet because in 1964, he said, I'm going to have you niggas voting Democrat for the next 200 years. So that was 1964. So 36 and 20, that's 56. So we only got 144 more years to go. Now, none of their indiscretions or allegations relevant. You know, Al Green, you know, they said you look up, see what he did, but they said his allegations are not relevant. John Conyers' allegation, not relevant. Clarence Thomas' past allegations with Anita Hill, not fit for office. Herman Cain allegations with different women, not fit for office. Roy Moore's allegations, unfit for office. Ben Carson, because he hadn't worked in politics before, unfit for office. I wonder what the difference is with the people we support and the people we don't. The ones we support as blacks are all Democrats, and the ones we don't support are all Republicans. Are we that simple-minded as a people? You know, Proverbs 1:22 says this: how long will you childish people love your childish ways? How long will you rude people enjoy making fun of God and others? And I mean, I'm not putting myself in that scripture, but I get attacked all the time because I want to support Democrats. And I tell people all the time, just because you don't hear me support Democrats don't automatically mean I support Republicans. I'm not either. I mean, one election I even wrote myself in for president. And that just tell you how disgusted I am with the whole system. I voted third party. So, but how long will you foolish people hate knowledge? Now, I believe as a people, we actually had bipolar disorder before it ever became a thing. Because James 1:8 calls it double-mindedness. And the Living Bible translation of James 1:8 says it this way. I believe this is the best way to make the point of what I'm talking about right now. You can take it any kind of way, it's still going to all equate to the same thing. But the Living Bible translates it, James 1:8 this way. Every decision you then make will be uncertain as you turn first this way and then that. And that's what we are. Say something about a Democrat, we blind. Say the same thing, exact thing about a Republican, oh, we got 2010 vision. And, you know, like I said, we got black folks saying they don't care what Biden said or did 40 years ago. They care about what Trump said 5 minutes ago. Well, we'll go with that. And so based on that, how do you think your parents felt about what Biden said 40 years ago? Because you heard what I said some of those black folks back in the 70s said about what he said with Brooke and Atkins and the NAACP. So you might not care about what Biden said 40 years ago, but how do you think your parents felt? Because let's go off that narrative. If Trump loses, You know, if Trump loses, even at whatever age he's going to be in 2024, he can run again. And if he's still living, and not still living, if he's still able, I'm not killing the man, if he's still able and doesn't decide to run in 2024, he can run in 2028 because you get 2 terms. So if he loses and he runs again in a future election a few years from now, what he's saying today shouldn't matter to us, right? I mean, based on the logic that we keep spewing out of our mouths, what he says today shouldn't matter in a future election, right? But I have one even better for you. We don't care about the past, right? Well, going on that narrative again, let us never ever speak about the ills of slavery ever again, because that was a lot further back than what Biden said 40 years ago. And that proves my point. We don't care about what Democrats have done or said. We will forgive them over and over and over and over again. You do know it was their party that was the only party that owned slaves. And here we are right today voting for our slave masters every election cycle. I'm not a big fan of analogies, but I have to think of an analogy on that one. That's like you got a rattlesnake, and the rattlesnake keeps biting you repeatedly. And you decide you're going to bring that snake home and make it your pet. And I guess we made up the phrase, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, because we keep voting for our enemies, but we don't realize it. Ironically, we say we forget the Democratic slave owners unless the conversation doesn't work in our favors. We forget all about the Democrats owning slaves. We'll talk slavery, then when you point it out, say, hey, them Democrats own slaves. Well, that's not important. That's not the same party from years ago. Yes, it is. They just do mental slavery on you today, but we ain't figured it out yet. And so we keep voting for our slave masters every election cycle. We say we forgive Biden for what he did and said in the past, but we continue to get mad at people like Botham Jean's brother, who forgave the white female cop Amber Geiger for killing him. And more recently, we got upset with Jacob Blake's parents for saying forgiveness is the key. Rioting and tearing up things wasn't the answer. We only want to forgive when it supports our own choices, regardless of how ill-informed those choices are. Matthew 7:5 has some words for people like this. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and fail to notice the plank in your own? So we got all these races in the Democratic Party, black and white. And I know you have black people say you can't be racist if you don't have no money, because without money you don't have no power. Okay, so we got all these races in the Democratic Party, black and white. But we only see racists across the aisle on the Republican side. So we see the dust, and it has to be dust on the Republican side because we don't vote for Republicans. We vote for Democrats, and that's the log in our eye. That's the plank in our eye. But we have 2020 vision, 2010 vision when it comes to Republican. And we can't see nothing when it comes to the Democrats. And so why is it blacks and Democrats find it so easy to defend their own races, but they can always find it in their heart to criticize Republican racists? Now, I read something the other day by a guy on social media, and I'm gonna stop with after I mentioned this. And I had to write it down because I couldn't remember everything he said. I didn't want to paraphrase this. I wanted to share this word for word. And this is what he posted. He said, I don't know why most people hate Trump. He is 95% of Americans. He's a bully. He's arrogant. He has a big ego. And I'm going to put a pin right there. Because I remember hearing a guy talk years ago about if he needed to take his daughter in for an operation, he wanted a doctor to perform an operation who had a big ego, that was confident in his abilities. He said if he was going to face a judge, he wanted an attorney with a big ego because he wanted that attorney to work in his behalf and be confident in his abilities to get him off. So big ego is not always a bad thing. He doesn't listen to anyone, and he think he knows everything. I mean, I see them all the time on my social media posts. I mean, it's not even funny how you're going to educate me all the time. All I do is study and research. And I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you. It's kind of hard to communicate with people who operate off sound bites and little short news clips, but they're not doing any research on anything else. They just repeating what they heard everybody else said. I remember hearing this audio tapes from years ago. People don't even know what tapes are. But this guy came off the stage and he heard people talking about him in the audience. Said, man, that was the worst speech I ever heard in my life. And he heard that going on throughout several people in the audience. So he found a guy that had invited him in. And he said, man, all these people around here talking about that was the worst speech they ever heard. And the guy that invited him said, oh man, don't worry about that. They just repeating what they heard everybody else say. And so that's how black people are with politics. All they can do is repeat what everybody else says. They can only repeat a soundbite they might have heard on a podcast or something. They can only repeat what they saw on the colored news network. They can only repeat anything they've seen on the Negro broadcasting channel. And so they don't research anything. Years ago, it was said, if you want to hide something from a black person, put it in a book. And I took offense to that years ago because I have a whole bunch of books. So you ain't going to hide too much from me putting it in a book. I'm going to find it. But sadly, when I look across the spectrum of us black folks, that statement rings true. Every year I look at the black economics and one area decreases every year, and that's the buying of books. And don't say audio because it's stats for them combined. But let me get back to what the guy said. Because, I keep going. And where did I stop? He said, he thinks he knows everything. Most people aren't secure with themselves and don't even realize they have most of his personality traits. Bunch of hypocrites. People got mad at him for saying in a private conversation, private is on all caps, grab him by the private part, you know what he said. But most of you pervs out here say worse than that to your friends and try to cop a feel a few times in your life and probably have actually done it without a woman's permission. People get mad at him for sleeping with a porn star, but millions of you men and women, all caps, watch porn every single day, all caps, and have memberships on Pornhub. People got mad at him for not taking the virus seriously. Oh, really? How many of you Trump haters still took your narrow behind to the beach and your favorite summer spots this year during quarantine without social distancing? You people hate Trump because he's you. All caps, several exclamation points. And as it used to say at the end of the Looney Tunes cartoons, that's all, folks.